Thank you, Demetrius, for sharing that. I was sitting there trying to hold myself when you was talking about I don't talk like this everywhere, um, because I've been unapologetic about the fact of where I come from. And I think that the reason that we have to do that is like Demetrius says, you ask when was the last time somebody was over in Inglewood. My brother lives on 63rd and Normal. He lives on 63rd and Normal. So when we talk about policies and policymakers who are making decisions, I have to, the uncle of my children, the man who shares the same DNA with me lives in Inglewood. I talk about the fact that I come from Cabrini and what that means, and not just in this heroic sense of like, look at you, you made it, right? And you've probably heard me say this before, that people ask me all the time, you know, how did you make it out? How did you make it? Which is based on the supposition of failure, right? Like if we own the fact that there is something incredible about a child having been born into extreme poverty and public housing in this city, from Cabrini being able to be the first African-American woman. If you looked at those buildings and looked at all those apartments and said that the first black woman to hold this position will be from here, we would all have thought that crazy. But it's because we know that there's an expectation that people who come from neighborhoods like mine, who come from those scenarios, are supposed to fail. And that is a collective failure of this city, of our country. It is not my singular exceptionalism. It is the collective failure of those who are in positions of leadership, who are in positions of policy, who are in positions of taxpayers, to the point that Demetrius made. If we do not recognize that the success of our city hinges upon those who have the least among us, we will continue to fail. If you do not recognize, and I say this, I am the living embodiment of someone who comes from a neighborhood in which we have not invested and did not care. And people are saying to me all the time, what are we doing on criminal justice reform? If you are putting your hopes on what I'm doing, but aren't putting your hopes into the people who live in the very neighborhoods that I come from, shame on you. Shame on you. So I think I welcome this conversation because it is in spaces like this that, you know, I too can sit and have my scholarly conversations.
You know what?
Tony, I promise to keep it scholarly.
Right.
But it is that piece that we have to recognize, kind of the intertwining of all of these failed systems that lead us to the criminal justice system. I think we talk about the criminal justice system as this separate and unique piece of what happens when we don't talk about economic investment or lack thereof, when we don't talk about failing schools, when we don't talk about public health and mental health, that those aren't just buzzwords. All of the failings in those systems lead us to the criminal justice system. This is the end point for policy failure across the board. And our responses to that have been using incarceration and using the justice system in ways that we've demonstrated have not worked well. And so now we're in the position of saying, how do we fix that? How do we reverse that? And so Demetrius, you talked about your lived experience having come through the justice system, particularly the age you were between 18 and 26. Talk about the uniqueness of that age, that time period, as we look in the justice system to intervene earlier and more specifically with that age group. What is unique about that age group?
Well, for me, it has to go before that. We have to almost make it criminal to start locking these kids up 8th grade and under. I remember we had Officer Friendly. I remember my first experience with a police officer was, Officer Friendly come in, interact with me, and that imprinted on my brain that all police officers aren't bad. When you are in these schools, and the first interaction that you come with an adolescent mind in 5th, 6th, or 7th grade, and you are actually being able to be locked up for a school scuffle, that's a problem with me because I went to school with kids that I know should have been locked up. But because of their economic situation, them people weren't coming in that school, and they was on drugs. They were on all these things. You know, it has to start with there because we have to get them younger. And we have to start changing the mindset. It's a mental thing. You know, you as a man think it, so is he. First you have to have the thought, and then comes the action. 18 to 24 is a strange time in our community. One thing we got to do in our community is stop saying kids are grown at 18. We ain't no kid grown at 18. I'm 40 and I still don't feel like I'm grown. You know, because if you putting this much pressure on a kid in our community, you know, first thing our parents and them, oh, you're 18, it's time to get out. That's right. No, it ain't time to get out. I'm just now starting.
My kid's getting out at 18, I'm just telling you.
No, they not. But also, she got a better socioeconomic situation too, so they're gonna have a better foundation than these kids that need more help in our community. So they might can get out at 18. She'll probably get them an apartment and all that. You know what I'm saying? She go help them. So ain't no apartment at 18 in our neighborhood. So we're putting too much pressure on these young men too early, these young men and women too early. But it's that time of adulthood. We think we know more than we know. We can't wait to get grown, and then grown comes and we like, oh my God, and we making all these poor decisions. But I say it's two detriments to the black community, honestly, what I'm finding. One is the fact that we don't respect our elders. So those life lessons and teachings aren't being filtered, and there's no succession plan of leadership. Look how hard you had to fight to get rid. And sometimes, I'm gonna be honest, man, some of the most racist people is them older black folks. To young people that are trying to come with new eyes on old problems for new solutions. Even in here, you have certain young folks coming up in the ranks, and I know they keep a foot on your neck. They make your work environments too harsh, and you come in there with a new idea, and so it's hard for the youth. And then the fact that in our community also, the elders hold on so long to the torch that they're about to die, and then they give you something. Oh yeah, but you didn't forgot more than I know, and we should have been in rooms being groomed 20 years ago. They should have let us in these rooms and let us talk to you guys and, you know, have these harsh conversations. You know, yeah, so that 18 to 24, we still learning. We still got to put a hedge of protection around these babies. You know, as a man, I know you're nowhere near mature enough to make these decisions. And you see it every day in our community, because when these kids feel like they're grown, then they don't look for any counsel. Your life is really good or really whack based on the good or bad decisions and based on counsel. Man, I thirst for knowledge. I'm a student of life. And I always tell the elders, and I even tell her, hey, look, I'm up under you like armpit hair. They like, what? Yeah, I'm up under you like armpit hair. You can't get rid of me. That means I'm tucked up under you because I understand that at 40, I still need to learn. Still need to grow. And at 18 to 24, man, in our community, first of all, you're lucky if you make it. That's why we say we grown. Because most of them, man, they not giving themselves a chance. And it's only out of desperation. And we need those resources and policies to come on and be compassionate and do other things that's in lieu of jail sentencing. You know what I'm saying? Put them in programs. Like I came up with a program called Replace Guns with Hammers. And that's getting young men out of the streets into the trades, rehabbing buildings on their own block, in their own community. Because, and it's a construction hammer, because some people say, well, you replacing a gun with a hammer, what, they just go beat them to death? No, a construction hammer. Replace guns with a construction hammer. So that's where I'm at. You know, at 18, we still need to put a hedge of protection around our kids. So do I ask her a question now? Yeah, let me stay on task, because what's her name?
Cam.
Oh, no, not
Tell
you.
me. Is
I
she-
want to make sure I stay on point.
Oh,
All right, that was your question. This is mine. I have an opportunity. I had the opportunity to meet the Congressional Black Caucus and other national leaders. How can I and other advocates work with lawmakers to leverage changes that reduce incarceration and increase other options such as job training?
I think what I've seen across the country in terms of what moves policy, particularly in state houses, are people with lived experiences talking about what the justice system did to them, for communities. I think your point that you made earlier, policy has been so academic. It has been people who have not had any contact with the communities that they serve, legislating what they think is in their best interest. It's this very paternalistic, I know better for you, I know what you need. When you talk about the disparities, for example, in crack cocaine versus powder cocaine from years ago, that was premised on folks believing that people who were using crack, which were largely poor Black people in areas of concentrated poverty, were then somehow more dangerous because of how crack sales were going. And again, disconnected from the community and the humanity of the people who lived there. So those people who were abusing the same drugs, using drugs, were somehow less than human because there was a vantage point that was far away. And people who use powder, I might know him, he was stressed, his father had addiction issues, that's okay. And then you are allowed to do these policy decisions in these spaces where you have no contact. And what we've seen in places like California, for example, there were a number of people who organized, who were previously incarcerated, and juveniles who went and was saying, look, this is what happened to me when I was a part of these systems. This is what it looks like for me. What you think you are doing in the name of good public policy, your policies have not only destroyed me, generationally, my children, the people who live around me are impacted by that. And so I think that we have to stop the barriers between legislators and those who have been impacted by policy and really find ways to use them to tell the story, to use them to illustrate what these policies look like. Because I'm trying to find the right way to say it because somebody's filming me. There are a number of people in this room who know me, so I'm struggling right now. Because I get really frustrated, if I'm being honest. I get really, 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 really frustrated when I sit in rooms and I sit in discussions that are about, well, this is what I learned. There's a place for academics, and we're in an academic institution. There's a place for, this is what has been studied, and there's also the place for the humanity, the lived experience. You can't tell me, well, somebody told me, this pastor told me. Don't tell me what somebody told you, right? Like, you have to really sit down and not speak. And let the people who have been impacted by systems, it's one of the things that as a prosecutor I want to do. My attorneys every day in courtrooms across this county will go and make recommendations, whether it's for a plea or for a sentence, that's just numbers to them. I can go and I'd say, you stole a car, I'm gonna offer you 3 years, without recognizing what does 3 years mean? What does that mean? What does that mean for that person? And as prosecutors, we tend to say, you did the time, you did the crime. Well, what is the impact of that on us as a society? How do you hold someone accountable? Where do we think that the arbitrary number 3 makes us safer? I don't know what the accountability looks like, but we get so caught up in this distance that I want folks to sit and talk to people who've been incarcerated. I want to know what your 8 years, and were you at year 3, year 4? Had the lesson been learned? Had you at year 7? Where was you at?
Right.
Where at year, what does it mean? What does it look like? Because we do these things separate from lived experience under the guise of it is in the interests of safety. And I want our communities to be safe. But I think the people who are making those decisions without asking real questions of those who have been impacted are doing it halfway.
To interject, all I would say is, what would you do to your child? Would your child for a stolen car deserve 3 years in jail? I don't think you would use that same ruler for your child versus a child you don't know. But my dad used to always tell me, be careful of the ruler you judge others with. That's the same ruler God is going to judge you. So I make my ruler a yardstick. It gave you enough room to grow, to understand humans make mistakes. But that's what I would ask you guys. What would you do to your mother if she stole a car, your brother, and then apply that to the justice that you're giving out to another person? Because we all one bad decision away from that ruler being used on us. And I've seen people that have given people a whole lot of years when it comes to corruption in Chicago, and that ruler get turned on them, they killing themselves. Oh, you just gave 1,000 years out. You can't do 2? Something to think about.
I do. Speaking of which, mandatory minimums. You talked about the fact that you were subjected to mandatory minimums.
Yes, ma'am.
And again, this dovetails into what we were just talking about and kind of the arbitrariness of this. What do you say to folks about the use of mandatory minimums and the impact that it has on young people?
I don't think mandatory minimums work. You know, I feel like we're an emotional community. It was emotion behind crack laws. So people thought they were doing the right thing, right? So now the big thing is gun laws now, you know. So now everybody's emotional about it. And when you bring emotion to legislation, you're clouded. And I feel like we need to do it on a case-by-case basis. You know, some criminals are harder than others. You know, you keep on doing the same thing over and over. Yeah, you need more time. I believe for that as a person that's done 8 years. So we have to look at it, but just blanket decision of if you come in here, you automatically get 10 years, you automatically get 5, you automatically get 3. I think that's a failure.
Talk about, you were supposed to ask a question, but I'm fascinated. Talk about what it does look like for you when you come out. You've done your 8 years, you're still relatively young. Explain to folks what that journey looks like when you are now back into the world, but you have that record.
Oh, it's a struggle. And I just thank God that I started to change myself while I was incarcerated. Spirituality was a big thing. But on every turn, they're using your felony against you. Every turn. But the saddest part about them using your felony as employment in the free world, as we call it in the world, I can work for that same company for 5 cents an hour incarcerated. So that same corporation that is using slave labor in jail, I go to that same company and I can't get a job. What sense does that make? Only because it's traded in the stock market, it's this, that, and the third, and you're getting free labor on one, but I'm more skilled than the person you just hired because I've been working for your corporation for 8, 9, 10 years. Give me the job. Oh, no. And so it starts a cycle of recidivism. By year 3, 80% you're going back to jail. I'm on year 5. I don't look like my story. I successfully got off of federal probation 4 years, supposed to do 5. It looks like a lot of obstacles, a lot of mountains, a lot of hurdles. For me, you're talking to a guy that woke up literally and tapped my girlfriend and said I was walking to the White House. So for me, it's really nothing that I don't feel like I can get over and overcome. 672 miles from my grandmother's house on the south side to the White House. So that's just, I'm just made different. I didn't look at it as, oh, this is the worst thing that can happen. But for a young man that haven't had these experiences and don't look at the glass as half full instead of half empty, and they coming back to a situation where they got to immediately take care of a kid, or immediately their mother's struggling, and all the people around them are living in poverty, 9 times out of 10, you go kick into survival mode, and you're gonna do the same thing. 80% recidivism rate by year 3. Your office is proposing innovative changes that can reduce ongoing involvement in the justice system, such as job training and education. You go, girl. But this is why I fought for her. I was on federal probation talking about Kim Foxx. Boy, risking life, health, and freedom to get that other lady up out of there. We ain't gonna talk about it. Youth are no? Can we increase the access and availability of these options, especially as it relates to youth and emerging adults?
Yes, so thank you. I mean, I think what we're trying to do, and I have to remind folks, I've only been in office 19 months.
That's it?
That's it. It feels like 7 years.
It feels like eternity.
I think that's like dog years. You know, I think what we first have to do is start the conversation, and it is, for many people, it's a provocative conversation that says that we can't just talk about incarceration. You know, I see a lot of my former colleagues from the juvenile justice space. Your point was well made. You know, we had a habit of arresting so many young people in school. When I was coming up, you fought at school, like you went home, and if you lost, it's usually the loser calling the police, right? Right. And I don't mean that like calling them loser, I'm like the person who lost the fight, right? And when I was coming up, you went home, you did a couple push-ups, you squared up for the next day, you did not call the police. But our mindset has changed such over the last several years that our reactions to what happens to normal adolescent behavior, kids fight. I have 4 teenage girls who live in my house right now. They fight on a regular basis. But that's what they do. And so we have to stop the conversation about traditional methods of like, they will learn, this will show them. If we lock them up, this will teach them. If you know anything about teenagers, you can teach them the same lesson behaviorally 7 times and they will still do it. You know, they'll say, oh, if you touch the stove and it's too hot, I still touch a hot stove, right? And so what we're trying to do is say, what is the prevention piece? How do we prevent? How do we invest in job training? How do we invest in education? How do we invest in alternatives outside of the criminal justice system that will stop recidivism? Because just incarcerating someone and having them leave with all of the things that you come back with, the inability to work, to get a job, to get housing, and then the straits in which you are trying to navigate, that's not keeping us safer. The more opportunities you have to learn, to work, to grow, means the less likely you are to recidivate. And that's where, as prosecutors, we should be spending a lot more of our energy and effort.